Malcolm Young was not born to shine. He was born to keep the light from going out. For more than 40 years, he stood on the left side of the stage, never seeking applause, yet it was his rhythm that gave acdc its soul. Where Angus Young set the stage ablaze with his wild solos, Malcolm quietly held the beat, like a heart that never stopped beating. But behind that iron discipline was a silent battle. A childhood of poverty in the factories of Glasgow, years of alcohol and inner turmoil, and the cruel illness that made him forget the very notes he once wrote. From Highway to Hell to Back in Black, he walked through every peak. Yet it was that very road that burned the soul of the man who created it. Malcolm Young is proof of rock and roll's greatest paradox. Sometimes the one who creates the thunder is the very one buried in its silence. This is not just the story of a great guitarist. It is the journey of a man who fought poverty, addiction, illness, and time itself, only to hold on to the one thing that never betrayed him: music. Music was always the only thing he truly trusted, and perhaps that faith was forged in the earliest years of his life, when Malcolm Young was still a boy in Glasgow, Scotland. Born on January 6, 1953, he was the seventh of 8 children to William and Margaret Young, a poor but tightly knit working-class family. His father, a mechanic who had served in the Royal Air Force, returned from the war with calloused hands and endless debts. His mother, a quiet and patient woman, stayed home to care for their large brood, holding the fragile household together amid the struggles of post-war poverty. In the early 1960s, Glasgow was cold and jobless. The winter of 1963, one of the coldest on record, covered the Cranhill district where the Youngs lived in a cramped council flat in sheets of white frost. When the Australian government launched the £10 PALM program to help British families emigrate for a new start, Malcolm's parents didn't hesitate. They believed that somewhere far away the sun would finally melt the ice that had trapped their children's lives. In June that year, the family of 15 packed their few belongings and boarded a ship bound for Sydney, a journey that would change the fate of every Young. But the promised land wasn't paradise. They were placed in the Villawood Migrant Hostel, a camp for new arrivals where families crowded together in corrugated metal huts known as Nissen huts. Days were scorching, nights were freezing as the wind howled through the thin walls. Poverty followed them to the new world, but now, amid the dust and heat, another sound began to rise: the strum of a guitar from George Young's room. George soon befriended a Dutch immigrant named Harry Vanda, and together they formed the Easy Beats, the first Australian rock band to conquer the world. For Malcolm, that was more than family pride. In the dim room at Villawood, he and his younger brother Angus would sit for hours watching George practice, memorizing every chord, every beat. They had no stage, no dreams of fame, only a quiet belief that music was the one escape from a life that offered them none. Yet before he became a musician, Malcolm was what teachers called a problem kid. He wasn't good at school, easily distracted, and struggled to fit in. In Sydney classrooms, his thick Scottish accent made him a target of ridicule, and he fought back the only way he knew: by throwing punches, smoking, defying authority. At 15, he was expelled for uncontrollable behavior. But that stubborn defiance would later become the very thing that kept him alive in the brutal world of rock and roll, where only the tough survived. From those cramped nights in the migrant camp, surrounded by old guitars and teenage smoke, the two young brothers began to imagine a different future, one where the sound of their strings wouldn't just comfort them, but would one day speak to the entire world. After leaving school, Malcolm drifted through small bands around Sydney. By the late 1960s, he was playing in Beelzebub blues, cheap pub gigs where the music had to be loud enough to drown out drunken laughter. It was there that Malcolm forged his steel-tight rhythm. No flash, no showmanship, just raw, heavy precision. He was deeply influenced by Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, Santana, and Stevie Wonder, artists who taught him that music didn't need fancy words. It just needed to hit straight to the heart. In 1971, Malcolm took a step forward when he joined Marcus Hook Roll Band, a project by his brother George Young and Harry Vanda, the legendary duo behind the Easy Beats' success. It was the first time Malcolm and Angus recorded together, but the album failed commercially. Still, for Malcolm, it was a defining moment. He realized he didn't want to be part of someone else's project. He wanted to create his own sound. A sound that was gritty, fierce, and above all, honest. In 1973, Malcolm decided to form his own band with Angus. While searching for a name, they spotted the label acdc on their sister's sewing machine. It stood for Alternating Current Direct Current, symbolizing two forms of energy, and also the two brothers themselves. Angus, the spark, and Malcolm, the grounding force. It was the perfect name for the unstoppable current they were about to unleash. The first acdc lineup featured Malcolm, rhythm guitar, Angus, lead guitar, Colin Burgess, drums, Larry Van Crete, bass, and Dave Evans, vocals. The band quickly gained attention in Sydney's clubs and pubs, but Malcolm wasn't satisfied. To him, something still felt fake. Evans's voice was too clean, too theatrical, while the acdc he envisioned needed to be raw, sweaty, and smelling of oil and asphalt. Then Bon Scott arrived, a flame that ignited the unfinished dream of the young brothers. When George brought him into the rehearsal room, Malcolm instantly knew they'd found their soul. Bon's raspy, muscular voice collided with the dry, grinding guitars of Malcolm and Angus to create a sound no one had heard before. Simple, ferocious, brutally real. From that moment, acdc became a true band, not just Australian boys imitating British rockers, but working-class heroes, loud, sweaty, and real. Malcolm's playing style soon became legend. He never soloed, never sought the spotlight. He played guitar like a machine engine, tight, compact, and mercilessly precise. Industrial hard rock, they called it, because acdc's music roared like machinery from a steel mill, raw and hypnotically real. From 1974 to 1978, Malcolm and acdc barely rested. They lived between studios, stages, and the dusty roads of Australia, where every gig was a fight for survival. High Voltage exploded in early 1975, rough, instinctive, and so fierce it was impossible to ignore. In It's a Long Way to the Top, Malcolm's guitar pulsed like the heartbeat of the band, relentless, steady, never missing a beat. He didn't showcase technique. He kept time, and that just keeping time became the soul of the entire song. That same year, TNT turned them from young punks into the new definition of Australian rock. Every riff Malcolm wrote hit like a hammer. Every transition breathed the rhythm of the streets, raw yet true. Dirty Deeds Done. Dirt Cheap, 1976, showed a band coming of age. Their rebellion no longer teenage mischief, but an artistic statement. Music meant to annoy the comfortable and comfort the restless. Let There Be Rock, 1977, didn't just save acdc from exhaustion, it saved Malcolm himself. In the screeching guitars of Whole Lotta Rosie, you could feel a soul struggling to break free. It wasn't just rock anymore, it was sweat, whiskey, and the hunger to live truthfully, no matter the cost. By the time Powerage arrived in 1978, acdc had changed. Harder, heavier, and Malcolm, colder, more precise. That album was the product of a perfectionist who believed that only absolute precision could make music outlast its maker. Each of his downstrokes growled like machinery in a factory, forging the unmistakable acdc sound. Rock stripped of glamour, pretense, and age. In those 4 years, Malcolm Young didn't just play the guitar. He forged it like a blacksmith at his furnace. And when the fire burned hot enough, the world began to listen. But glory never comes without cracks. The relentless touring schedule bred exhaustion and tension, sparking conflict between Mark Evans and the Young brothers. In 1977, Evans left the band, replaced by Cliff Williams, calm, steady, and dependable, ending the chaos. From then on, AC/DC's golden lineup was set. Malcolm, Angus, Bon Scott, Phil Rudd, and Cliff Williams. 5 men, 5 pieces of metal, hammered together in sweat, whiskey, and burning guitars. And at the heart of that storm stood Malcolm Young, the man who never raised his hand to be remembered, yet became the reason the world never forgot. In 1979, AC/DC entered a realm few bands on earth have ever reached, Highway to Hell. The album was recorded in London, where Malcolm and Angus forged a chain of riffs that sounded as if they were born from molten metal. Highway to Hell wasn't just a song. It was a working-class anthem, a roar from those ground down by everyday life, yet still screaming to live on their own terms. For Malcolm, every guitar stroke wasn't just sound. It was the heartbeat of a generation, rough, defiant, but utterly real. The album exploded worldwide, turning AC/DC into a global phenomenon, and for the first time, those immigrant kids from Villawood were called legends. But just as the fire burned its brightest, darkness fell. In February 1980, Bon Scott, the wild soul of AC/DC, died of alcohol poisoning after a night of heavy drinking in a parked car in London. The band collapsed. Angus went silent. Cliff went home. Everything froze, as if AC/DC's pulse had stopped beating. And in that silence, Malcolm was the only one who didn't fall. He didn't scream, didn't mourn aloud. He simply said one sentence, cold and steady like the rhythm he'd always played. Bon would want us to go on. Out of that grief came Back in Black, an album born as a tribute to Bon Scott, but also a challenge to fate itself. Malcolm and Angus recruited Brian Johnson, a singer with a voice like an electric current, and threw themselves into recording at the Bahamas in the middle of storm season. They worked through blackouts, their sweat mixing with thunder, and that chaos became the soul of the album. Hell's bells rang with the weight of mourning, Shoot to Thrill burned with the hunger for life, and Back in Black, the title track, became a declaration for a generation. Death isn't the end, just a rest between beats. When released, Back in Black wasn't just a success, it was a miracle. Over 50 million copies sold worldwide, making it the second best-selling album in history, behind only Thriller by Michael Jackson. But for Malcolm, the numbers never mattered. While the label pushed for a more commercial sound, he was the one who stood his ground. He fought to keep AC/DC from drifting away from its raw, working-class tone, the sound of sweat, grit, and truth. In an era when every band was chasing technology and fame, Malcolm stayed loyal to his battered Gretsch guitar, his cracked Marshall amp, and his simple creed. Rock isn't meant to show off. It's meant to live. That discipline saved AC/DC from being swallowed by commercial trends, keeping them pure. A machine of flesh and blood, powered by heart and memory, built by men who refused to surrender. After the storm of Back in Black, AC/DC didn't stop. In 1981, they released For Those About to Rock, We Salute You, an album that felt like a war cry from victors after battle. It became their first to top the US Billboard chart, and for the first time, the world saw Malcolm not just as the rhythm keeper, but as the true architect of their sound. The cannons that thundered at the end of the title track weren't mere theatrics. They symbolized the explosive power Malcolm had engineered with his colossal rhythm and the hard, metallic energy no one else could replicate. But glory always brings exhaustion. By the mid-1980s, as glam metal, synth pop, and MTV dominated, acdc began to be seen as old-fashioned. Flick of the Switch, 1983, and especially Fly on the Wall, 1985, were criticized for being repetitive. To Malcolm, that was a deep wound. He refused to accept that acdc was past its prime, throwing himself into production alongside George, striving to make the sound cleaner, heavier, without losing its raw edge. The price was sleepless nights, bottles emptied with every new mix. His perfectionism became an abyss, and by 1988, before the Blow Up Your Video tour, his body and mind finally gave out. Malcolm realized he couldn't go on. He voluntarily withdrew from the tour to enter rehab, a rare move in the rock world, where weakness was seen as sin. His nephew, Stevie Young, stepped in temporarily. While the band toured, Malcolm stayed in Sydney to fight the hardest battle of his life. Not with audiences, but with the addiction that had consumed his blood. He stayed silent, out of the media's reach, focusing only on recovery, day by day, hour by hour. When he returned, Malcolm was a changed man. His eyes were clear, his hands steady, and his smile calm. He had not only conquered alcohol, he had rebuilt himself. He gave up drinking and smoking entirely, living for one thing only: music. Those close to him said that from that day on, he never relapsed. The same cold discipline he once gave to rhythm was now devoted to life itself. The 1990s marked a rebirth. The Razor's Edge, 1990, exploded with Thunderstruck, a baptism of sound announcing acdc's full resurrection. 5 million copies sold in the US alone, millions chanting that electrifying riff, all bearing Malcolm's fingerprint, the man who turned rhythm into lightning. Then came Ball Breaker, 1995, a return to their raw, hard-edged roots, recorded under extreme, closed conditions to capture the truest sound possible. It was followed by Stiff Upper Lip, 2000, more restrained but steeped in experience. The rock of men who had survived wars, loss, and rebirth. Across those 2 decades, Malcolm Young was no longer just the man keeping time for acdc. He was its heart, its helmsman, steering through every storm the music world could throw. And, as always, he chose to remain in the shadows, so the whole world could hear his guitar, even if they never saw him. In 2003, acdc was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the ultimate honor every band dreams of. As the world applauded them endlessly, Malcolm simply said, "We're just doing our job." It wasn't humility. It was honesty. To him, rock was never about glory. It was a craft, a job that demanded to be done to the very end. In 2008, Black Ice was released, marking their comeback after 8 years of silence. The album immediately hit #1 in 29 countries, proving that acdc's brand of rock, even after decades, still carried an untamed, irreplaceable power. The tour that followed lasted 20 months and drew over 5 million fans worldwide, a living testament to their vitality. On stage, Angus still jumped like a live wire, Brian still screamed like thunder, and Malcolm, as always, stood in the left corner, calm and steady as he had been for 40 years. No one knew that these were the final months he could still play completely as himself. During the Black Ice Tour, 2008-2010, strange things began to happen. Malcolm forgot parts of songs, lost track of set lists, and sometimes had to relearn his own familiar riffs before each show. To the audience, he remained the unshakable pillar of steel. But backstage, his bandmates saw the truth. The genius was slowly losing the very language that had defined his life. His final performance took place in Bilbao, Spain, in 2010. That night, Malcolm still played, still kept perfect time, still finished flawlessly, though by then, many said he could barely remember the chords. After the tour, everything unraveled faster than anyone expected. Malcolm underwent lung cancer surgery, had a pacemaker implanted, and then came the cruelest diagnosis of all: dementia. The disease robbed him of the thing he loved most, the thing he had lived for all his life. For months, he tried physical therapy, practiced guitar as a way to fight the fading, but memories slipped away piece by piece. In April 2014, acdc was forced to announce that Malcolm would be taking a break due to health reasons. For fans, it was heartbreaking. For Angus, it was a farewell he wasn't ready to say. Yet even as his light dimmed, Malcolm left one final mark. Rock or Bust, released later that year, still bore his songwriting credit. The riffs he had recorded earlier were kept intact by Angus and the band, as if no one could ever replace that hand. By September 2014, acdc confirmed what everyone had feared. Malcolm could no longer continue. His nephew, Stevie Young, who had once filled in for him during his rehab, officially took over for recording and touring. From that moment, acdc kept running, but its heartbeat had changed. Because no matter how closely Stevie mirrored his uncle's style, one thing could never be recreated: the quiet, steadfast, indestructible soul of Malcolm Young. When the stage lights went dark and Malcolm Young's name slowly disappeared from tour posters, his world shrank to a quiet space, filled only with the murmurs of memory and the gentle hands of the woman who had stood by him for nearly half a century. They had met in the early 1970s, when acdc was still just a fledgling Sydney band, and Malcolm was living in a small apartment, practicing through long nights until dawn. Linda wasn't part of the music world. She worked in an office, calm and practical. But it was precisely that serenity that drew Malcolm in. Amid the chaos of rock and roll, she was his silence, the place where he could lay his guitar down and finally breathe. They married in the mid-1970s, just as acdc's fame began to ignite. It wasn't a loud celebrity marriage, but a quiet and enduring bond. Linda rarely appeared in public. She was the one behind the curtain, following the endless tours from afar, raising their two children, Kara and Ross, while Malcolm roamed the world. It wasn't an easy life. At the height of acdc's success, he was rarely home for more than a few weeks. Linda often had to handle everything alone: parenting, managing the house, shielding their family from the pressure of fame. Yet what made her remarkable was her silence. She didn't complain, didn't demand, just waited for her husband to come home. Sometimes after long, weary months, reeking of whiskey and cigarettes. The 1980s, when Malcolm wrestled with alcoholism, were their hardest years. Linda watched him spiral, withdrawn, distant, lost. And more than once, she thought of walking away. But when he decided to enter rehab, she was the one who stayed. Linda brought the children to visit, sent letters, and left small notes, words Malcolm would keep for the rest of his life, reminders of why he had to come back. After he recovered, they rebuilt a quiet, simple life, free from the noise of the world outside. In his later years, after leaving acdc, Malcolm lived quietly in a modest home in Elizabeth Bay, Sydney. No stage, no tours, no lights. His world narrowed to a few seaside streets where Linda would walk with him every morning. Dementia slowly drew him away from reality, but those close to him said he still had moments of clarity. When he heard a guitar, he would tap his fingers, as if still keeping tempo for a song that never ended. On October 23, 2017, fate tested the Young family once more. George Young, the eldest brother, mentor, and producer who had guided acdc from their earliest days with the easy beats, passed away at 70. For Angus, it was a devastating loss. For Malcolm, though his memory had faded, family members said he seemed to recognize the news. A brief silence, a distant gaze, as if he knew the first part of their journey had come to an end. Less than a month later, on November 18, 2017, Malcolm Young followed, passing away at the age of 64. After years of battling dementia, he took his final breath surrounded by family, leaving an unfillable void in the heart of rock. The news struck like thunder. The entire music world mourned, not just the loss of a guitarist, but the soul of an era. The funeral was held at St. Mary's Cathedral in Sydney, a sanctuary of stained glass light where beams of color fell across a coffin covered in white flowers and a vintage Gretsch guitar resting quietly on top. Family, friends, acdc bandmates, and hundreds of artists from around the world gathered to farewell the man who had changed the sound of rock and roll with his own hands. Tributes poured in from every corner. Slash wrote in Rolling Stone, "Malcolm Young was one of the best ever rhythm guitarists in rock and roll. His riffs have become legends, as has he." Eddie Van Halen shared, "It is a sad day in rock and roll. Malcolm was the heart and soul of acdc." Nancy Wilson of Heart told Rolling Stone. Malcolm Young was the embodiment of rock itself. His rhythm guitar style needed no embellishment. He laid down the simple, solid guitar truth that taught us all the less is more ethic. From Foo Fighters to Def Leppard, from Alice Cooper to Guns N' Roses, artists across the world played acdc's songs on stage to honor him. In every arena, when the opening riff of Back in Black thundered through the speakers, tens of thousands of fans rose to their feet, hands lifted to the sky. No one spoke, but everyone knew. Malcolm Young was still there in every beat, every chord, and in the heart of rock itself. After Malcolm's passing, it seemed his journey had reached its end. But amid that silence, something strange began to spread. Whispers that Angus Young still kept hundreds of recordings his brother had played. Beginning in 2018, rumors grew among fans that Angus was using those very riffs as the foundation for a new album, as if Malcolm was still there somewhere, keeping time for the band from the other side. Jam magazine later confirmed it. In the early 2000s, the Young brothers had recorded hundreds of riffs and unfinished rhythm tracks, pieces that were never released. After Malcolm's death, Angus quietly revisited the old tapes in the studio, restoring each sound and using them as the heart of Power Up 2020, an album he called the final tribute to Malcolm. It wasn't just a musical project, it was a ritual, a way for Angus to say goodbye in the only language the two had shared all their lives, the sound of the guitar. Dee Snider of Twisted Sister revealed in an interview, "All 4 surviving members have reunited with tracks recorded by Malcolm while he was still alive. It was a symbolic reunion, not loud, not showy, just 4 men playing alongside a 5th who was no longer there, through the music he'd left behind. Power Up rang out like a hymn, not just for acdc, but for the very spirit of rock and roll itself. Rhythm may die, but the soul does not." At the same time, Gretsch, the company that had been with Malcolm his entire career, released a reissue of his legendary guitar, the Beast, G6131 Mewai. Every detail, from chipped paint to the scratches on its body, was faithfully recreated, a promise that imperfection itself was part of his identity. In Sydney, Melbourne, and even back in his hometown of Glasgow, massive murals began to appear. They depicted Malcolm in his familiar stance, hair tousled, head bowed, right hand striking the strings. No crown, no wings. He was immortalized as a god of rhythm, the man who turned the guitar into the heartbeat of the world. And to this day, whenever Highway to Hell or Back in Black plays, whether in a stadium, a bar, or on an old radio, people can still hear him. In every sharp downstroke, in every perfectly timed break, Malcolm Young is still there, keeping the world from falling silent. The legacy Malcolm Young left behind doesn't lie in medals or sales records. It lives in the riffs that make the world nod in unison, in the bass and drums he engineered with the precision of a craftsman, and in the life philosophy he carried to the end. Silent, but never absent. If Angus was the flame, Malcolm was the steel that kept it burning. For over 4 decades, he built the structural core of acdc's sound, industrial rock that was both primal and modern, uniting millions in a single heartbeat. Many critics have said Malcolm didn't just play rhythm, he was rhythm. In a world full of guitar heroes showing off their technique, he chose to step aside, turning precision, endurance, and restraint into his signature. That's why generations of musicians, James Hetfield of Metallica, Dave Grohl of Foo Fighters, Slash of Guns N' Roses, have all admitted his deep influence. Malcolm didn't just play rhythm. He built the wall everyone else could lean on, one British magazine wrote. And it remains the truest image of him. A wall of steel that never wavered, no matter how the world around it changed. But beyond music, Malcolm's greatest legacy was his attitude, the very thing that earned the respect of an entire industry. He never bragged, never sought the spotlight, never let fame distort his rhythm. For Malcolm, rock and roll wasn't about being famous. It was about being real. While many of his peers fell to addiction, ego, or excess, he stood firm through discipline, loyalty, and an unconditional love for the craft. Rock and roll has birthed many legends, but there was only one Malcolm Young, a man who didn't need the spotlight to be its soul. And perhaps, in every guitar still ringing somewhere in this noisy world, he's still there, steady, patient, precise, just as he always was. You could call it genius, you could call it faith, but for Malcolm Young, it was simply doing his job. And you, what do you think? Among all the legends who lived for music, has anyone ever kept the world's rhythm as faithfully as he did? Share your thoughts below and join us in honoring the man who turned silence into the heartbeat of rock.